Thank you, Julie, for this opportunity, and thank you, My Jewish Learning. So I'm just gonna paste in the chat for everyone the handout we're gonna be using. So take a second to open that, and that will be all the sources we're gonna go through together, or as many as we get through. And as always, well, maybe you're new to this or new to classes with me, but I love it when people have questions and comments. So in between reading each source, I'll kind of come back to everyone and ask you questions and ask if anyone wants to jump in on it. And Julie will help me kind of notice who, because there's more than one screen of you, who is waving or who raises your hand or who says something on the chat, however you want to do it. So does everyone have the handout and have it open? I'll just post it again for anyone who just came, and I'll open it myself, and we'll begin. And you'll see at the top, I've written certain questions which appear in the bold italic font. They are prompts for reflection, which you can take, and in your own time, you can think about them, write about them, express yourself about them in any artistic way you want to help you prepare for the festival. Just, there you go. Ah, great. I'm going to share screen when I read from the handout. That's how we do it. So let me...
Is this going to be recorded?
Yes, it will be.
Thank you, Julie. And I could watch it tonight or what?
Probably tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
So hopefully you can all see my screen. So we're going to begin with the first source, which is from the Book of Nehemiah, but just a word of introduction before we say that, which is in the Torah itself, Rosh Hashanah is not actually called Rosh Hashanah. It's a strange and funny thing because we think of it as being such an important festival. It's our new year after all. But actually, in the Torah, the springtime festival of Pesach is called the beginning of the months. And Rosh Hashanah is just called the first day of the seventh month. And then it's given these names that we have here. A Shabbat commemorated with sounding the horn, a Yom Zikaron Teruah, and also Yom Teruah, a day of sounding the horn. So it's not actually given the title of the new year. And it seems that what happened is that the Torah's perspective was that the new year was firmly in the springtime. And then later on, when the exiles came back from Babylon to build the second temple, roughly around the year 500 BCE, they brought back with them the custom and the idea that there was a new year in the fall. And then we put together the spring new year and the fall new year. And actually, as some of you may know, in our tradition, there's at least two other new years, which are less important than those two big ones. And then even other points during the year, I'm thinking of also festivals like Hanukkah, for example, also have a kind of spiritual quality of a new beginning. So really, our calendar actually has many, many points of beginning over in it. But this is a big one, right? This is definitely one of the two biggest and definitely very important for us to understand what is it all about. And also just an interesting thing to think about is, you know, considering what I just said, that it's like not even called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah and it wasn't even the original New Year, isn't it interesting that it's become such an important festival that so many people who don't celebrate so many other things Jewishly do celebrate this? So interesting for us to think about in that context too. So in Nehemiah, the context is those exiles who I just mentioned came back from Babylon to build the second temple and build the second commonwealth, again, roughly around the year, say 500 BCE. And this is what happened. On the first day of the seventh month, Ezra the priest brought the Torah before the congregation, men and women, and all who could listen with understanding. Nehemiah the Tirshata, Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who were explaining to the people, said to the people, "This day is holy to the eternal your God. You must not mourn or weep." For all the people were weeping as they listened to the words of the Torah. So what's going on? It's Rosh Hashanah. It's the first day of the seventh month, the first of Tishrei. And the Torah is being read, and the people are crying. And it seems that they're weeping because everything is so foreign to them in the Torah, and they suddenly realize how far they are away from it, and that they've been acting in a way which isn't true to the Torah. And that's why they're weeping in regret. He further said to them, Go, eat choice foods and drink sweet drinks, and send portions to whoever has nothing prepared. For the day is holy to our Lord. Do not be sad, for your rejoicing in the eternal is the source of your strength. Then all the people went to eat and drink and said portions and made great rejoicing, for they understood the things they were told. So I'm going to come back to you all now and just ask a quick question, which you can even answer by mouthing, which is, what festival does that sound like to you all? Eating and drinking with great joy and sending portions to people. You can just mouth it. I'll see you. Yep, Purim, right? It doesn't sound like the Rosh Hashanah that many of us may have experienced before. Maybe it's our first time this year, but that we've heard about. It's normally thought of as a very serious festival. Simcha Gedolah, the Hebrew, great joy, isn't like the most natural phrase that many of us would associate with it. So it's important, I think, to start from there to show that at different points in history, depending on what's going on, the festival has been celebrated very differently. And now we're going to go into a couple of sources from the early rabbinic period, which show the kind of classic description of Rosh Hashanah as is usually presented and how it usually appears also in the liturgy in the day and the prayers of the day. So we'll look at that together. Let me share my screen again so you can all see with me. So from the Babylonian Talmud, a whole tractate called Rosh Hashanah, guess what it's about, 16b. Rabbi Crespidai said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, 3 books are opened on Rosh Hashanah. One of totally evil people, one of completely righteous people, and one that includes people with both good and bad deeds. The completely righteous individuals are written and sealed immediately for life. The totally wicked individuals are written and sealed immediately for death. The sentence for the individuals with both good and bad deeds is suspended from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. If they merit, they are inscribed for life. If they do not merit, they are inscribed for death. So what's going on? There's 3 books. We have Book of Life for good people, completely good people, Book of Death for completely bad people, and then the in-betweeners. And the tradition, the Talmud, and then Maimonides and so on, say pretty strongly that all of us are in-betweeners, the Beinonim, the intermediate people. Why? Because there's none of us who is only good or only bad. There's 99.99% of people. We can all write 2 columns in our journal, things I've done well this year, things I've improved with, things I've done good that I'm proud of, and the other column, right? Stuff I'm still working on. Let me just see what's going on the chat. In the future, okay. Okay, not for me. Okay, fine. So that's how the day is usually presented to us. And any one of you who has been to synagogue and remembers some of the most important prayers, if not, then listen out for them this year, depending on how you're celebrating. A lot of the most important prayers talk in these terms about we're being judged, and if we're good, then we'll be judged for life, and if we're not good, we'll be judged for death. And the way that it works is that for most of us, it's ongoing judgment. As the source said, a judgment is actually suspended. It's left literally hanging until Yom Kippur. So actually, this is a clue as to why Rosh Hashanah became so important, and why today so many people go to synagogue, or in this case, Zoom services or whatever, who don't do so many other things Jewishly. And it's really because of its proximity to Yom Kippur. It's the warm-up for Yom Kippur. And that's what this source is really saying. So that's important to bear in mind, I think. Let me just pause there. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that side of the festival, the kind of relationship to Yom Kippur and these 3 books of judgment? Great, that's okay. We have plenty more to see. So let me share my screen again. And now we're going to see an early midrash, actually a medieval midrash, which is not from the earliest. There's like different layers of when the rabbinic commentaries on the Torah, the midrash was written. This is not from the very earliest layer. It's like a little bit later than some of the others, but still relatively early. And we're going to see now that this puts a very different spin on this whole business of judgment. Because that source from the Talmud we just read sounded very serious. Who's going to live? Who's going to die? The famous Leonard Cohen song, Who by Fire, which is based on that prayer, right? Who by fire, who by water, who's going to live, who's going to die? That's very serious. But listen to this. What nation is like this nation that knows the nature of her God? Usually, when a person must appear in court, they wear black clothing, cover themselves in black, and let their hair grow and their nails grow, for they do not know the outcome of the judgment. Not so Israel, who wear white clothing, wrap themselves in white, cut their hair and nails, and eat and drink and rejoice on Rosh Hashanah, knowing that God, blessed be He, does miracles for them and produces a favorable judgment for them, tearing up their decree of harsh din. Din is judgment, harsh judgment. So what's going on here? We just read in the Talmud that the books are open, a serious judgment is being made. If we're not careful, if we don't do the right things, we might end up in the wrong book and have a very bad judgment made. But the Midrash is saying, well, if that was the case, if it's really, if that was the whole picture of the day, then you would expect us to treat it like a day of mourning and a day of grieving, right? We would wear in black and cover ourselves up. Instead, we're wearing white, and you may know there's still a custom still to this day to wear new clothes, or like, to introduce some new accessory, so we can say the blessing, She'achianu, thank you for this new thing, thank you for bringing me to this time. So we're wearing new nice things, and we're cutting our hair and our nails with ourselves nicely, and we eat and drink and rejoice. Remember Nehemiah, just like Nehemiah said, eat and drink and rejoice and give gifts to each other. It's true. It's a very, very common custom still to have a big festive meal on Rosh Hashanah. Actually, that will be one of the most difficult things about Rosh Hashanah this year for many of us, right? Will be the usual lovely big festive meal for many of us will be affected by the current situation. So notwithstanding that, generally the custom still exists that we do that. And the Midrash is drawing our attention to that and saying, isn't it strange? We have this big, heavy, serious judgment being made, but we're acting like it's a party. And it explains why. It says, we know that the Creator is going to do miracles for us and produce a favorable judgment and tear up the degree of harsh judgment. It's just a fascinating thing to say on lots of levels. First of all, we have a very important principle in Judaism, encoded in law and very, very central, which is you don't depend on miracles. We are not allowed to act in such a way and then say, oh, don't worry, God will fix it for me. That is forbidden. So why is this saying that the people know that, as if we can depend that God is going to do that? Also, the relationship with God here is very strange, right? God is the one who's doing the judging. Back to the Talmud with these 3 books open, right? But here is God who's essentially going to let us off the hook, right? So it's like, is this all just a game? Is this all just a kind of theater? Like God is pretending to judge us, but really he's going to let us off the hook and so on, right? What's going on here? Let's read one more source together, then I'll come back to you all. Another Midrash, this one from Exodus Rabbah. This one is a little bit earlier. So Israel, the people Israel says to God, Lord of the universe, you have said to us, house of Israel, like clay in the potter's hand, you are in my hand. Verse from Jeremiah, we are like clay in God's hand. Even though we sin and make you angry, do not abandon us, for we are the clay and you are the potter. Come and see, this potter creates a jug and leaves a stone in it, as it is taken out of the oven. If someone puts liquid in a jug, it leaks from where the stone is, and the liquid is lost. Who caused the jug to leak and lose its contents? The potter who left the stone in. So what's going on here? We have these 2 verses in the prophets that say, we are like clay and God is the potter. And by the way, that's an image which some of you may be familiar with. It's evoked in the High Holy Liturgy. In Yom Kippur, in the evening service, we have a song that talks about this. We are the clay in your hand, God. So it's, it's not only some random verses from the prophets, it's verses which have really been channeled into our High Holiday experience. And the Midrash is saying, well, if we are the clay and you are the potter, then you made us like this. And if I have what Judaism calls a yetzer hara, an impulse for doing things which are not great, literally it's like an evil impulse. But anything I do that is not good for me and good for others and good for the world, anything I do that is destructive or self-destructive in any way, that's just the way I was made, right? I am human. I have human fallibility. I have human faults, and I am bound to mess up about 1,000,000 times a day and do my best to, do it slightly less badly each time. But that's just the reality of being human. So the Midrash is saying, God, you made us like this. So all this business about judging us, who are we really judging? Actually, we have to do the next source, then I'll come back to you, because the next source really follows up on this one and rephrases what it's teaching in a very succinct way. It's from the great Hasidic master, the Maggid Mezrich. He just says it very quickly, top of the next page in 2 lines. All who judge Israel, the people Israel, are judging the blessed God, as it were, for he is unified with us. And I'll just say a word of explanation, then I want to come back to you all. We, the people Israel, the Kabbalah, the Zohar says that we are unified with the Creator. You don't have to buy Kabbalah for this to work. The Torah says that people, all people, are created in the image of God. And you don't even have to hold by the Torah or, hold by any kind of God at all for this to work. Because let's just put it this way. If there's a universe, we are children of that universe. We are creations which are merged in that universe. And we are also created from the earth. Like the word Adam, human being, comes from the word Adama, earth. So like we are earthlings. We come from the earth. We are children of the universe. We are, another way, we are created in the image of God. However you want to say it, or whichever way you say it, all says the same thing, which is if you judge a person or if you judge a group of people, you're judging life. You're judging the Creator. You're judging the whole condition of the universe. So let me come back to you all and ask, how does this resonate with people's experience of Rosh Hashanah so far, what we've read? When you think about Rosh Hashanah as you have experienced it so far, which of these sources resonates more with people? Are people kind of more familiar with the kind of books of judgment being open, the heavier kind of judgment, or are people more familiar with the kind of like saying essentially, God, this is all on you? See a few comments on the chat I want to respond to quickly. So first of all, the wearing white is a custom which now some people do it more on Yom Kippur. Actually, it's also a custom on Rosh Hashanah too. So someone asked about that. Someone asked about the Book of Nehemiah, and it is part of Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, but it's not in the books of the prophets. It's actually in the last section of the Hebrew Bible, in the books of Ketuvim, of writings. That's helpful. So somebody, Michael, said he's surprised to see that God is implicated in our faults and foibles. Right, that's a very interesting way of putting it. Isn't it interesting that we're essentially blaming God? Becca says maybe something in between. We are to admit to ourselves, others in our lives, and God our shortcomings, and we will be forgiven. Beautiful. That's really it in the end, isn't it? It's we go through this process. There's a real process that we can take advantage of if we want to, right? If we choose to enter into this process, I said before, like, is it just theater? Maybe it's theater, but it's actually also completely real at the same time. Some of you may know there's a great book called "This Is Completely Real." This is real, and you are completely unprepared, by Rabbi Alan Zu, Zichron Livracha. So he wrote this beautiful book about the high holidays, and he's saying in the book it is real. I can't sit here today and tell you, like, I know for sure it's real. But I can tell you, if you enter into it as if it is real, then it's very, very powerfully transformative, right? Just like that comment from Becca, right? If we go through this process of admitting our wrongdoings, doing the work on ourselves, trying our best to change, then there's going to be a real transformation. That's going to have a real impact. And then, of course, we can open to an experience of forgiveness. Jonathan says, the serious judgmentalism of Yom Kippur has sapped a lot of the joy out of them. Right, exactly. Beautifully said, Jonathan. So I'm trying to point out with some of these other sources that it's been a little bit, I think, imbalanced sometimes. I don't know, I know where each of you grew up and how you grew up and where you've experienced these festivals before. Different communities do it differently. But I think often there is a certain heaviness to it which doesn't reflect the whole picture. We like to justify our sins, says Peace. So I think what I'm hearing there is we have to be careful that we're not just going through the motions and saying, oh yeah, but I'm okay. Like there has to be a real process there of really holding ourselves to account. right? Of really looking in the mirror honestly and saying, for example, that difficult relationship in my life or that thing I wish I hadn't said or done, could I do better next time? And how will I do better next time? We can be more optimistic, more celebratory. Beautiful. That said, we remain accountable. Exactly. Beautiful. All right. Thank you, everyone, for those beautiful comments. Let's go back to the sheet and see a little bit more together. So next source is from a great Hasidic Rebbe who lived relatively recently, lived up to World War II. He was the Rebbe. He was a Rebbe in Warsaw who actually he was in Warsaw when the ghetto was created and led the people in the ghetto, and eventually was killed by the Nazis. But he survived a long time in the ghetto. And it appears that's the Rebbe, Rav Kalonimus Kalamis Shapiro. He now actually has a very big following. It's a great story because a lot of his writings were written in the ghetto while he was there, and then hidden underground, and then found literally in the rubble way after the war, and some just after the war and some way after. So this is what he says about Rosh Hashanah. The time for Teshuva, that's returning to our best selves and returning to the divine. But Teshuva is sometimes translated as repentance, but literally it just means return. So I prefer to translate it that way. So the time for Teshuva, for returning to our best selves in the divine, is Rosh Hashanah, the time of the creation of the world, because Teshuva is also creation. So what's he saying? He's saying, on Rosh Hashanah, we talk a lot and we commemorate the fact that that's when the world is created. And actually, technically, I mentioned before that the Torah doesn't seem to say that the year begins then. So also the rabbis in the Talmud argue about when was the world actually created, meaning was it created in the springtime when the flowers are blooming and the bunnies are jumping around, right? Is that creation? Or is creation in the fall as things actually beginning to get darker and we gather in the harvest, which is maybe less intuitive for some of us. So the compromise, but also maybe quite deep answer, I think, the rabbis come to is that Rosh Hashanah in the fall is actually when the conception of the world is. There's a kind of creation which precedes actual creation, and it's conception both in thought and in the sense of impregnating something. And that's why on Rosh Hashanah, one of our famous prayers, we say, Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the day of the conception of the world. Whereas at Pesach, we're clearly talking about the actual blooming of spring and of new life. So it's the time of conception, and the Rebbe here is pointing out that just like the world is being conceived, which is a stage on its being created, it's also when we can do that for ourselves. Because he's saying, Teshuvah, this process of returning to our true self, making ourselves better, it's an act of creation, right? If we want to improve our character traits, improve our relationships, try and do better next time, that is a creative act. We can think of that just like a painter or a musician or a writer or whatever other medium you want to think of, a dancer. How would a creative person approach wanting to undertake a creative task? They would devote time and energy to it, and they would try and create the right kind of mindset and conditions. They would try and get in the mood. They would make sure they have all the tools available to do it, and so on. So he's saying we need that kind of intention and preparation and that kind of mind state if we're going to succeed at making ourselves anew. And Rabbi Jill Hammer here just puts it so beautifully in the quote I've quoted inside the text in italics here. Born with a seed, the tree bears seed. The land spends itself to create what will thrive next spring. We use the growth of past seasons to sustain a new one. Rich with the fruits of the new year, we prepare to be winnowed down to a single seed, the new beginning of our lives. So in other words, she's saying, this is the time of the harvest. The tree has made this beautiful fruit, and we all know what happens to fruit. Some of it gets eaten, the rest of it goes to seed, and the seed goes back in the ground. And so it's this beautiful dual nature of Rosh Hashanah. We have two beautiful questions to ask here, as I put here in the bold font in the italics for us to think about and continue to work with. What is the fruit I've already borne? Meaning, how was the past year? What have I achieved? What have I done? How have I grown? What did I do good with? What did I not so good with? And what is the seed we're being winnowed down to? Meaning, I bore the fruit that I bore. However it was. Hopefully there's some good there. I'm sure there's lots that still needs some work. But whatever that fruit was that I created in the past year, what is the seed that I'm carrying with me into the next year? What is the seed? What is that? And we can think of this in different ways. We can think of it in terms of a lesson that I've learned this year, right? What is the lesson I've learned this year? We can think of it in terms of what is something I've learned about myself this year or about life. It could just be what's going on for me right now, right? You know, it could just be something that's come up in the last few days or few weeks as we go into this time of reflection heading into the new year. It might just be something that life keeps kind of reminding us of, like a feeling of like, you know, what about this? That, you know, maybe a lot of things in our life are great. We've done really well with a lot of things, but life sometimes just has a way of being like, what about this? You know, this thing isn't going away. So what is that thing? What is the question, the challenge, the opportunity that feels like it's what we're carrying into the new year with us? And you know, how can we honor that? How can we make space to do our best to be a new person in how we relate to that, to do that creative act of Teshuva? Let me just pause and come catch up with all of you on this chat. There's some more stuff. Yom Kippur was the most joyous day of the year. They were almost like angels close to the Holy One. Yes, beautiful. Janet points out that Yom Kippur is called one of the most joyous days of the year. That's true. It's interesting that almost everything in Judaism really does come back to joy sooner or later. The 9th of Av, Tishrei B'Av, not so much. That's the day of real sadness. But really, everything else really does, right? You know, so there's an underlying joy, even to things that seem very serious. When we enter into them in the right spirit, there's an opportunity for connection to ourselves, connection to the divine, connection to others, and that brings joy. So yeah, beautiful, Janet. You know, even Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which, you know, we usually relate to in this way, we might find that joy. Anyone else have any questions or comments about those last couple of sources? About this kind of creative side of making ourselves anew, that Teshuva is creation, and where we are like the fruit and then the seed. Well, I hope those questions can be ones that people can carry with you into the festival and beyond, and maybe between now and Yom Kippur we can find some time to reflect on them. Now we're gonna look at some more sources on the sheet. I've got a surprise for everyone in the next one. Great radical teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. Let me share my screen again. So the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement, and he made a revolution. His Torah teachings were so radical that he inspired a movement which eventually spread to millions of people and changed their lives. And this is a great example of how radical his teachings were. So we said before in the Talmud that there are 3 books open. People are going to be judged for life, death, or wait and see. This is what the Baal Shem Tov says about that. All of the thoughts falling on a person on Rosh Hashanah are the writing in the books of life, death, or the in-between, whether for good or bad, God forbid. The evil thoughts need to be sweetened through battling our evil impulse, which is bringing those thoughts down on us through awakening our free choice or through self-sacrifice. So I think a lot of us are used to thinking about our thoughts in terms of, well, this is just what's running through my mind right now, right? You know, now I'm thinking about this, now I'm thinking about that. All of us have all kinds of thoughts. And there's a lot of truth to that. Very few of us can control our thoughts all the time, or even most of the time. But it is possible to condition ourselves to be more likely to have certain kinds of thoughts than others. You know, for example, you know, people talk about having a gratitude journal, right? You know, if you write at the beginning of the day or the end of the day or some other fixed time in the day, if you write in your journal 3 things you're grateful for every day, then you're more likely to think about things you're grateful for, and you're more likely to have thoughts of gratitude, and that in turn will affect the rest of your thoughts. Just an example, right? So he's saying here, the Baal Shem Tov, that I love that he actually mentions free choice in this. He says if we awaken our free choice, we actually have the opportunity to affect our thoughts more than we usually think we do. And that is the writing in the books. What does that mean? Let me come back to you all. What that means is the writing in the books is our destiny, right? We're going to be written in the book of life, please God, for a good year, right? Or not, right? that's what's going to happen to us over the coming year. He's saying that depends on our thoughts. If we are thinking things that write us in the book of life, then that's what's going to happen, right? It's up to us. Now, I don't think we should necessarily take this as like an absolute, rule for like, this is how life works and we can always count on this. Like, I can always just think nice things and then nice things will happen. But I do think it's true that if we think good things, like I mentioned before, gratitude, for example, we make it more likely that when whatever happens, we will be able to find some good in it, right? We're not going to be able to stop things happening in the world outside, but we will be able to change our approach to it, our response to it, right? We all know the difference between getting out of bed on the wrong side and feeling like everything is lousy and everyone's out to get me and everything is, XYZ, and getting out of bed on the right side and feeling like, wow, everything's going my way, right? It's possible for us to do some of the work of making that change happen, he's saying. Let me come back to everyone. Anyone have any thoughts about that or questions? So I'll say one more word about that teaching. I love how what he's doing is, somebody mentioned before, thinking about the judgmentalism of the festival, thinking about, how heavy it was. I love what he's doing is he's saying, it's not that there's some old man in the sky who's judging you. It's just you. It's just each of us on our own doing the best we can. If we judge ourselves harshly, and that's what's going to be. It's really up to us. Kenneth said on the chat, I think, therefore I am. Interesting. The way that we think certainly has a big impact on us. Actually, interesting. That makes me think. The Baal Shem Tov also says that wherever a person's thoughts are, that is where they are. So I think he actually would agree with what Kenneth just wrote there. Essentially, wherever our thoughts are defines us to some degree. The good news is we can change that. We have more control over that than we might think. We just need to do that work, as he says, of awakening our free choice, of taking more responsibility for it. Then we think, Gail says, repetitive negative thinking linked to dementia risk, article in Science Daily. Right, yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. And also, we don't even have to go to that extreme. We all just know what it's like when we're upset about something and we have, a kind of cycle, a loop of negative thoughts about it. It doesn't make anything better. It only makes us feel worse and often then makes the situation worse. It's a negative feedback loop. Let's see, attitude is a choice that can influence everything. Beautifully said, Paula. I love that. Yeah, attitude, that's it. Cheryl, you've raised your hand. Let me unmute you so you can say what you want to say. Hi.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you again. I'm really curious, since this is class about calendar, if you could talk a little bit about not so much how we're observing Rosh Hashanah, but actually that it's starting on the new moon. And I love all the metaphors of moving from the darkness into the light, even as we're struggling inside ourselves with the difficult parts, but also that starting with joy, but that gives us maybe the fortitude to go forward. But I'm really curious about the calendar part, about how our holy days land on a full moon or a new moon. So if you could go into that, that would be a wonderful combination with what we've been talking about so far.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for raising that, Cheryl. It was funny. I had to streamline from a lot of things to less things, and that was something I did decide to leave out. But since you've asked about it, I'm really happy to talk about it. Absolutely. It is also beautiful and important. So one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah is hiddenness. And it goes back to this theme of judgment, that when we think of the Creator as judge, it's not the kind of like warm, fluffy, intimate relationship with the Creator that is the Kabbalah calls the relationship of love. It's a relationship of judgment. And so one way that's described is that the divine is distant or hidden. So one way that's represented is the moon, which is taken as a symbol for Shekhinah, the divine presence, is also hidden. So we're at the beginning of the month. If we're lucky, we might see a tiny sliver of the moon, depending on where we are. but we might most likely will probably not see any moon at all. So when the moon is hidden, the Shekhinah is hidden, we're in that state of a lack of loving intimacy, should we say? And if we want there to be loving intimacy, let's put it like this: we have to do the hard work and make it that way. Whereas on Yom Kippur, things are warming up. By Yom Kippur, the moon has waxed. It's the 10th of the month, right? And the moon is not that far away from full. It's looking like, well on its way to full. And the Shekhinah is shining very nicely for us, suggesting a lot of compassion, a lot of rachamim. And then when we get to Sukkot, the first night of Sukkot, we actually have a full moon. And for the whole first few days of Sukkot, definitely, we have a moon that is looking great. So that Shekhinah representing that loving intimacy with the divine is shining strongly for us. So I think this goes back to that, what I said right at the beginning about the Torah, those passages in the Torah which talk about the festivals. Yom Kippur, there's what to talk about. Like the Torah has a whole chapter where it talks about all the different ritual of Yom Kippur. But the first day of the 7th month, the only thing we're told is you mark it by blowing your horn. And it's like a stepping stone to Yom Kippur. And I think this quality of hiddenness plays out there too. Like even in the Torah, it was kind of hidden, right? The Torah didn't even want to go into it. But over time, everything we're learning is about the teachings and the customs which have kind of emerged from that hiddenness. That's what I would like say about what you asked. Is there another specific question you want to ask about it I could help with, or was that addressing what you're asking?
Sorry. I'm just always curious about how the holidays land on a new moon or full moon, and always play with that metaphorically. But that's very interesting about Shekhinah, and also the part about that we have to step it up. So reaching in for that joy, even though we know that this whole other aspect of judgment, so that it kind of asks us to step up in our partnership, perhaps.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah, that's it. That's really it. And that's one way of understanding din or judgment. Right? We call Rosh Hashanah Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. One way of understanding judgment is it's a separation or a distancing for the sake of closeness, for the sake of them coming back together in intimacy. One metaphor for that is that the Midrash says that in the Garden of Eden, the first person was actually created with two faces. A male face this way and a masculine and feminine face facing this way and that way, away from each other. And then they were separated, and then they could meet face to face. So that's sometimes used as a model for Rosh Hashanah, that we are being separated from the divine, so we can then come back as a kind of partner to the divine. But to be a partner, we have to do that stepping up, as you said, Cheryl, do that taking responsibility. Let me just look at the chat, a couple of things here. And Michael says, how was the Besh the Baal Shem Tov received in his time with this kind of thinking? Was he ostracized by the establishment at the time given his radicalism? Yes, he was. He successfully started a revolution that affected millions of people, and him and his movement were criticized and excommunicated. But to be honest, nobody ever did anything worth doing in Judaism without being excommunicated, like including Maimonides and Rav Kook and anyway, a lot of other good examples. So it's just a sign that he was, doing something worth doing. What's interesting is that things are warming just at the time of judgment. Janelle, I do not actually, I would love to know more of what you're talking about. So if you want to, either on the chat or if you want to say more of what you mean. Do you mean that the moon is getting bigger? Was that it? Okay, Janelle, you're welcome to chime in whenever you want. But I don't see you, so put it on the chat maybe whenever you want to. In the meantime, Jonathan says we can create our own judgment by our thoughts. The Besh said joy washes all sins. Interesting. I mean, definitely the first part, I think that's a good read. Is that a quote from the Besh, Jonathan? That he said that? Joy washes all sins? Yes. Wow. Thank you for that. Okay. I never came across that quote. that is that's a really interesting quote. All right, I would feel free to send me the source of that. I would love that. Oh, Janelle says I was referring to the waxing of the moon. Right, exactly. Got it. Got Janelle. Thank you for that. Right, so the moon is getting bigger. Exactly. Right. So that does synchronize with that, how that judgment then kind of turns to more compassion, like you said. Great. Okay, let's go back to the source sheet. This is great stuff. Top of the next page, we have this beautiful teaching about the shofar from the great Hasidic master, the Kedushas Levi, or Levi Yitzchak. So he says like this: there was a king who sent his only son to a distant land, for some reason known only to him. A lot of Hasidic stories start like this. As time passed, the son became accustomed to the ways of the villagers among whom he lived. He became a coarse person, and he forgot the niceties of life with the king. Even his mind and his innermost nature grew coarse. One day, the son heard that the king was going to visit the province where he lived. When the king arrived, the son entered the palace where he was staying and began to shout in a strange voice. His shout was in a wordless sound, since he had forgotten the king's language. When the king heard his voice, and he saw that he had even forgotten how to speak, he was filled with compassion for his son. This is the meaning of the voice of the shofar. So the son is sent far away. He forgets who he is. He forgets how to conduct himself. He even forgets the language that was spoken in the palace. And all he has is this cry beyond words, right? A cry that is not even in language. And this is all he has, and this is what rouses the king's compassion. So it seems to me this is suggesting to us a kind of primal scream, right? A kind of expression beyond language, an expression from a very primal place in us, like before we even try and put things into words, which to me is very helpful, because I'm thinking sometimes I just don't have the words, right? Sometimes all I have is a feeling, right? A feeling of having messed up, being lost, being confused, right? Sometimes I can't articulate exactly what I did wrong and exactly how I want to improve it and exactly what I'm going to do to improve. Sometimes there are no words, but maybe we can cry. Maybe we can cry out, scream, cry in whatever way we can. And maybe that's what the shofar is, right? The shofar is that cry. Actually, the rabbis say that the three different noises we make with the shofar are all to suggest different kinds of human cry. You've got like the big long one, tekiah, and then you have teruah, which is like broken up to suggest our brokenness, and then you have shavarim, the most broken one, which suggests our absolute shatteredness, right? And actually, feeling that brokenness and that shatteredness is a very important part of this whole high holiday period. One of my teachers once said to me, he said these words: when we were growing up, if you were not crying as you approached Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and as you were going through them, if you were not crying, then people thought there was something wrong with you. Like it was a given that you should be doing serious introspection, serious work on yourself, and not beating yourself up for the sake of it, not making yourself feel bad, not that kind of crying, but really being honest with yourself. And if we're really honest with ourselves, ... I don't need to finish that sentence, right? We all know. We all know. We try our best. We're all wonderful, right? It's not our fault. This is the way God made us. But also, we know, right? We all know that the many limitations we have and the ways that hopefully we could try and do better. So we just have about a quarter of an hour left. Let's look at a little bit of material on Yom Kippur, because this is as I said, this is a course about the calendar and living with the calendar the whole month. And so Rosh Hashanah is very, very important, and it's coming very soon. I also wanted to offer a little something on Yom Kippur as well, which is also very important. This is a beautiful source from Rabbi Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of the land of Israel, of the pre-state of Israel. So he says here in one of his notebooks, one who grieves constantly for their sins and the sins of the world must constantly forgive and absolve themselves and the whole world. And in so doing, they draw forgiveness and a light of chesed onto all of being, and bring joy to God and to all creatures. and they must first forgive themselves and afterwards cast abroad forgiveness over all, the nearest of them first, on the branches of the roots of the soul, and on their family and their loved ones, their generation and their world and all worlds, and thus is revealed all the good that is hidden away in everything. So we have to forgive ourselves, and we actually have to start by forgiving ourselves. Yom Kippur is all about us asking for forgiveness and forgiving ourselves and each other. And Rav Kook is saying it's only going to work if we start by forgiving ourselves. If we're holding anger, blame, resentment, guilt, shame against ourselves that we're not willing to look at and be with, there's a serious limitation there to our capacity to give and receive forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is one of those magic things like love. It has to be given and received freely. It doesn't work in one direction. It doesn't work when we say it's just for this person at this time and not for this person. It just doesn't work like that. Our sources also say this about Teshuva. Teshuva, returning to our best selves, only works when it's inclusive. It only works when we include everyone in our Teshuva. What does that mean? It means when we stand there or sit there saying, please help us be better. We want to try and be better. It only works if we do that with everyone in mind, when we include everyone in that, not as opposed to, what is maybe tempting and even natural sometimes to kind of be like, well, I'm asking on behalf of myself and the following list of people who I like, right? But not those people I don't like, right? Those people who do things differently to me, those people who hurt me, etc., etc. We all have a list like that of people who it's harder to empathize with, people who it's harder to group ourselves with. But love, forgiveness, teshuva, they only work when we accept that everyone needs these things and everyone is essentially deserving of these things just because they're human, just because they're fundamentally created by the same God. Of course, details may vary, but consult your local advisor. But read the small print. But as a general principle, this is the human condition. This is what we're here for. We're all children of the same God in the same universe. Let's read a little bit more together about Yom Kippur. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says, through teshuva of an individual, the individual is forgiven and the whole entire world. When the Jewish people fast, they are not answered until evildoers are included in the union. So really like I was just saying, when we do the work for ourselves, if we're really doing the work for ourselves, we're also doing it for everyone. It has ripple effects for the whole world. And when we do it, when we fast on Yom Kippur, do whatever we do to mark these days, it just doesn't work unless we include, he says it very strongly, evildoers, right? Those people who we look at and we think they're doing evil, right? But nonetheless, we're asked to include them. We're asked to not think of ourselves as so different to them, which I think is asking from us to be radically honest and be honest about the fact that we also have a Yetzer Hara, right? We also have an inclination to do evil, destructive things. Maybe we control it most of the time. Maybe most of the time we've been nice. Maybe. I know of myself that sometimes, quite often, I don't control it and be nice, right? I mess up a lot. So can I therefore get down off my self-righteous horse and realize those people who I think are so evil, maybe I'm not so different to them in some ways, right? Maybe I need to actually realize I'm doing this on behalf of everyone. I'm just seeing on the chat. Oh, beautiful. So Janet, oh wait, let's go back. I don't want to skip any. Okay, Richard first. Primal cry, primal scream seems I don't know what that word is, orthogonal to the joy of the whole day. So, I guess it means like opposite. So Richard, I'll let you say more about that and then I'll respond when I'm sorry, I just don't know what that word is. Then Janet says, the mention of the sun ties in so beautifully with the shofar and its relationship to the cries of Sarah, Menu, and Sister Mother. Beautiful, yeah. So Janet's pointing out in our tradition, the shofar and that story about the shofar, we have these stories also about cries, the cries of the mother, the cries of our matriarch Sarah, and then Sisera's mother also. So yeah, that story does tie in beautifully with those stories. Thank you for that. And Jonathan says it was Rabbi Pinchas who said it, not the best. That's great. And you got a link there. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. That's really, really great, Jonathan. I'll check that link out after the class. Michael says, a tall order if we are to include enemies of Israel in this category, e.g. the Iranian regime. Here's the thing, Michael. Here's the thing. I mean, and it's for all of us. And it, we can think on the geopolitical level, or we can think just on the personal level of people who have hurt me. If this whole Teshuva business is real and it's going to work, if we're really going to have our chance at opening ourselves to try and make ourselves better, then the only way that we deserve that second chance, the chance to make ourselves better, is because everybody deserves it. One way this comes up in our tradition is that the Talmud says Teshuva was created before the world was created. Before the world, right? It's not like a newfangled technology. It's a precondition of existence. And then it says in the Midrash, when Adam, the first person, was created, they were made from the dirt that the altar of atonement was made with. The Adam, who is all of our ancestors, all people's ancestors, is made from the altar of atonement, is made from the stuff of forgiveness. So people may be wrong, people may do terrible things, people may well be our enemies, as like the example you gave, right? People may be trying to harm us. There's a difference between saying we're all in this together and we're all people and we all therefore deserve a second chance. There's a difference between that and saying, I'm gonna let myself be hurt by you, right? Let's say whether it's a person or a country or anything, whatever level you want to work on, personal or political, somebody is trying to hurt you and they have hurt you and they'll hurt you again. We have every right to have safe boundaries to say, I'm not gonna let you hurt me again. But that's not the same as saying, I'm going to dehumanize you and saying that you have no right to this love, this forgiveness, this opportunity for a second chance, right? Those are not the same things. We can forgive someone or see them as worthy of forgiveness without necessarily opening ourselves up to be hurt by them again, right? I might forgive someone and say, actually, the responsible thing to do now that I've forgiven you is to never speak to you again, because I can't trust you because you're going to do it again. But I forgive you. Like I don't hold it against you. That's just the way you are. That's okay, right? So yeah, Richard says the opposite. So let me come back to Richard's question. Notion of a primal cry seems opposite to the joy of the holiday. Well, to me, it doesn't. It doesn't. When I think about a primal cry, I don't think about sadness. I actually think about liberation. I think about getting in touch with something inside me that actually helps me be more free. And it helps me get rid of some neurosis, some kind of mind games that a lot of us spend a lot of our time trapped in thoughts, stories, scripts, neurosis. Jews are very good at this, but all people are good at this. And maybe going back to the primal cry, it might be cathartic, right? It might actually be a little bit heavy at the point, but I might feel much better after I've done it. Right? It might give me greater access to joy after I've been through that. Janet, I do have a source for that. I can't give it to you in the middle of the class, but email me. My email's on the sheet. I'll be very happy to give that. Appreciate that, Michael. That's great. It looks like we just have 5 minutes left. Let's just see a tiny bit more of what's on the sheet. But everyone's comments and questions are really wonderful. I'm very much enjoying them. Let's see a little bit more. So the Talmud, Bava Batra, it's talking about the stone tablets that God gave Moses. You may know, you may not know, there were 2 sets of stone tablets. The first set, God gives to Moses. Moses is carrying down the mountain, terribly happy with this present he's got from God. And what does he see? The golden calf, the people dancing around it. Moses gets very angry and he throws down the first set of tablets and they shatter and they break. And then we spend a long time doing Teshuva, doing returning, apologizing, repenting. Moses has to beg for God to spare us and give us a second chance. We are forgiven for that sin of the golden calf, and we're given a new set of tablets, and that happens on Yom Kippur. That was actually the very first Yom Kippur. So the reason that the 10th of Tishrei is the date of Yom Kippur, speaking of the calendar, is that's what happened on that day, first of all, according to the Torah. So we have the shattered pieces of the first tablets, and then we have the shiny, new, nice second tablets. And you might think that once you have the shiny new second tablets, which represent our new relationship with the divine, our new covenant, and everything is lovely, you might think we don't need the broken pieces anymore. They're kind of like an embarrassing reminder of something we'd rather forget. So sweep them under the rug, throw them away, do whatever you want to do with them, right? No, the Talmud says that we took the complete second tablets and the broken tablets, and we put them together in the ark. And the ark is the center of our collective life as a people. The ark is in the middle of the Holy of Holies. The ark is where all of our attention, all of our prayers are focused. So in that central place, in the middle of everything, where all of our attention is, we have our shiny new tablets. Yes, this beautiful new relationship with God, the person that we want to be, the new us, the hope for the new year. We also have the truth about who we are, all the mistakes we've made, all the brokenness, the truth about the human condition. We're carrying it with us. We don't try and hide it. That's the teaching. We do not try and hide our brokenness. We carry it with us. And really, it's such an important teaching for this time of transformation. We might think, if I want to be a new person, be a better person, then I have to kind of deny who I used to be, right? I have to cut myself off from who I used to be. And that's just not it at all. I actually have to bring that along for a ride. I have to bring everything along for a ride. And ultimately, the more I integrate everything, actually, the better I'm going to be. And the more I'm going to be able to honor myself to be who I really, really am. We're running very low on time. So I think maybe just one more source and then we'll wrap up. Quick source here from the Maggid of Mezrich, great Hasidic master. He says in the Talmud, in the place that Balei Teshuva stand, completely righteous people do not stand. And he goes on to explain, actually, I'll read it, it's nice. I heard an explanation about Teshuva, somebody who made Teshuva, somebody who returned, is greater because they already know the excitement and enthusiasm of sins. And when they make Teshuva and engage in Torah and mitzvot, they do everything with great enthusiasm as desire. For they know enthusiasm well, unlike a righteous person who never encountered it. So what's he saying? He's saying the lesson is, if you did something wrong, which again, all of us clearly did many times in many ways, we can harness those appetites, those desires, those passions, whatever was driving our behavior that we wish had been a little bit different, whatever it was, we can channel the appetite, the desire, the motivation, we can channel it to whatever we want. And he's saying, if you channel it into serving God, doing the right thing, serving life, however you want to call it, you're going to be much, much better than somebody who was a goody two-shoes who never did anything wrong, right? Somebody who was a goody two-shoes who never did anything wrong doesn't know what it's like to really get up off their tuchus and really do something with desire, right? Because they're always just trying to do what the good book says. We don't want to be those people, said the Maggid Medrash. We want to be the people who have appetite, who have desire. We're just trying to direct it in the right direction. That's our work. And I'll just say one very brief word about the last source on the sheet. And we won't have time to learn this together, but just so you know what it is. It's a teaching from Rav Kook again, and then something based on it. And what it is it's a positive confession. Because on Yom Kippur, we do these confessions where we confess everything that was wrong, everything we did wrong, everything was so bad. Actually, Rav Kook says we also need sometimes to confess what we did good. We need to also affirm the goodness in ourselves. This is not instead of the other confession, but as well as we need to balance it. We need to affirm who we are, the whole picture, and carry it all with us. And hopefully, please God, that way we can do a healthy process of Teshuva this month. And we didn't have time to talk about Sukkot, but please God, all this work we're doing on ourselves in the beginning of the month, in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is going to help us get to Sukkot and experience so much joy and love, which is really what that is about. It's about that feeling of like we've emptied ourselves out a little bit, and then we can just celebrate, truly celebrate. So I'm going to stop there. Really thank you everyone so much for all your questions and comments. It was lovely and wonderful stuff. My email is on the sheet, and I'm very, very happy to receive emails and to see people's feedback. Also on the website that is linked to on the sheet, you'll see a lot of resources on that website for the high holiday period. So feel free to check that out too. Thank you, my Jewish Learning.